Hi, and welcome to Thursday Comics. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee, and Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, The Adventures of Adam Star and the Solar Legion. I'm also hard at work on WITCHMAN, a new superhero comic that recently had a successful Kickstarter. So this is a pivotal issue of Thor, maybe the most important issue of Thor. It's a real turning point. The Mighty Thor number 136, To Become an Immortal, featuring the uncanny menace of Him Who Is Unknown. Another great sort of throwaway Kirby villain or monster that's, pretty awesome in his own right. Really, the thing that makes this such an important issue is what we're seeing here on the cover. Jane Foster being transformed from mortal to goddess by Odin, and what the consequences are of this issue. Okay, talk about a beautiful opening splash. Picking up a moment after the previous issue, Thor and Jane watched Wundagore, the High Evolutionary's kingdom, turn into a spaceship and fly away. And now they're left, where it once stood. To become an immortal, a proud phantasmagoria of pageantry presented by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, delineated by Vince Colletta, lettered by Artie Simic. Atop a towering mountain peak somewhere in Europe, the mighty Thor and lovely Jane Foster, the mortal who has won his heart, prepare for what is destined to be the most fateful journey they have ever taken. And now be thou prepared for thrills and wonderment beyond mortal ken. They are making their union official. They've been separated for months and months. These two are in love. Thor shared his secret identity with her as Don Blake. It's, progressed further than any ongoing superhero soap opera has ever progressed up to this point, with the exception of Jack and Stan's other comic book, The Fantastic Four, where Reed Richards and Susan Storm have gotten married by this point. But it's not like Sue Storm starts off issue 1 as, a colleague at Reed Richards' day job who doesn't know that he's secretly Mr. Fantastic. They start out as, superhero partners on a superhero team, fully, with no secret identity. So it's kind of a bigger deal to have sort of a couple decades before Lois Lane and Clark Kent get married. It's kind of a big deal to have, that kind of storyline progress to this point. Never again, my love, shalt thou have cause for fear. Never again shall the god of thunder forsake thee. My life shall be thine forevermore. And now place thine arms around me so. By the power of my enchanted mallet, we now depart this mortal sphere. Let thine eyelids be closed, beloved, for when next they are opened, they shall behold the sight of all sights. Now, Jane Foster, now shalt thou look. The colors, the brightness, the sheer beauty, it's almost unbearable. 'Tis but the shimmering splendor of the fabled rainbow bridge upon which we do stand. Thor, that noise, those men. So now they're on the rainbow bridge of Asgard. Just being on Bifrost or Bifrost, however you pronounce it, just being there in its normal circumstance wouldn't be enough for Jack Kirby. They arrive, and it's in the midst of war. The cavalry of Asgard is going off to fight in a war with the trolls, a war which we're only just now hearing about. This is, one of the great ongoing storylines of this run, and the way it just sort of segues into place with all this other stuff going on. They arrive and they're departing, and they have a prisoner. They've captured one of the trolls and are bringing it back with them. And it's kind of, beautiful for this story where Thor is bringing Jane Foster into his world. And her first sights there are overwhelming and terrifying. She sees all these intimidating horned gods of war on horseback, on armored horseback, and then a troll being carried by. It's all, very disorienting, very horrifying for her. How monstrous that unspeakable creature. Is he a troll? Do not avert thine eyes, beloved. Thou must become accustomed to such sights, for within this fabled realm the forces of evil hath many faces. And now she meets Heimdall. He's freaking her out too. He's like 10 feet tall. He's got this helmet with horns. What? That man, that sword, that horned helmet. Tremble thou not. 'Twas only Heimdall, matchless grizzled guardian of Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. Forgive me, darling, it's all so new, so terribly startling to me. Forgive thee? Anything thou wouldst do requires no forgiving, beloved. Could I ask forgiveness of my heart, my very soul? She's brave. This stuff is scary. She's having her honest reactions to these things, but she's willing to go through all this because of her love for Thor. But the time is come to prepare thyself, for the glory and the grandeur of Asgard now await thee. And I feel like this storyline would probably be very relatable to a comics fan, particularly a comics fan of this time, maybe one of like the college-aged Marvel fans of that era. Thor is kind of like the comics nerd who's introducing his girlfriend to his favorite comic book. He's showing her Asgard and all the glories of Asgard. This is like his secret world. This is the stuff this is what sparks joy for him. This is, the stuff he's really into, and he's showing it to her, and he's got all this enthusiasm, but she's just not that into it. She doesn't care about his collection of Thor comics. She doesn't care about Jack Kirby. Thor's trying to tell his girlfriend about how great Jack Kirby is. She just doesn't give a shit. And she's trying. She cares about him, and she knows he cares about this stuff, but she just can't make herself care about these things that are just so off-putting to her. Please stop talking about Jack Kirby. Here's Odin in his war room with the map stretched out. So it is like, as we're reaching the sort of culmination of the romance with Jane Foster that began in the second issue of this comic and has been going ever since, and been the fuel for all of these storylines with all their cosmic twists and convolutions. At the core of it was, Thor doing all of this so that he and Jane Foster can be together. We're at that culmination, but at the same time, we're planting seeds for this like really interesting ongoing subplot of Asgard at war. And again, this is around the time Kirby is concocting the New Gods, his sort of God War epic. So we're seeing, him sort of doing a testing ground of that. What if, what happens when your comic book gods go to war? And Jane meets Odin. And look at this contrast, this giant metal glove and this tiny hand, this tiny delicate hand. And yet, as intimidating as that might be to put your hand in this like large, almost kind of like a Terminator hand, it's still, there's like a gentleness there too. Thou must not tremble, my child. Give me thy hand that I may place it on mine. Mayhap thou wilt draw confidence and serenity from the strength which is mine own. Many days ago, honored father, thou didst affirm that we might be wed. The word of Odin is a bond eternal. Mortal female, stand forth. I shall make thee raiment fit for a goddess. For goddess thou shalt be. So be it. What has happened to me? 'Tis the moment we have long awaited. My father prepared to make thee an immortal. For none but a true goddess may wed a god. I have a gift to bestow. Stand thee back, flesh of my flesh. I grant thee a gift worthy of a thunder god's bride. The enchanted gift of unlimited flight. No longer art thou earthbound, Jane Foster. Thus speaks Odin. I'm soaring into the sky. Merely think of a destination and thou shalt fly there forthwith. So Odin has transformed Jane Foster into a goddess and even given her her own signature power. And I think of, again, Kirby's concocting his New Gods epic. I think of Avia, the mother of Scott Free, the wife of Highfather, and her power was flight, and her name Avia, like aviation. And so, Jane Foster's kind of like that. She's now a goddess with her own signature power. And in, previous issues, there was the plot line of that, Thor would have to renounce his godhood in order to marry Jane Foster and just become immortal, since he didn't have Odin's approval. Used later in the Superman movies for the storyline with, in Superman 1 and Superman 2, Superman had to give up his powers in order to marry the mortal Lois Lane. Now, Jor-El is giving Lois Lane superpowers so she can marry Superman. Odin is giving Jane Foster the power of a goddess, making her into a goddess so that she can, truly be Thor's wife. A really great sort of, happily ever after kind of solution. As a child, I often daydreamed, thought how wonderful it would be to fly like a bird, but I never dreamt it could be so terrifying, such an alien, unnatural sensation. And this is like real, this feels very fresh because, we're several years into the development of Thor, and maybe the first couple issues, Don Blake had this, novelty, this gee whiz wow factor of like, wow, I'm Thor. I've got all these powers. This is great. After he discovered the hammer and the walking stick. But now it's like we get that fresh perspective again of this viewpoint of someone who has just gotten superpowers and how wonderful it is and how, dreaming of flying and things. It's really beautiful. It isn't possible to fly by thought alone. What if something goes wrong? What if the power vanishes? Oh, she falls. She was not yet ready for such a gift. So we get a little bit of like an Icarus story. Thor, there to the rescue, snags her as usual. My darling, thank heaven you reached me in time. Thou must put aside thine earthly fears. Thou must learn the unquestioning courage of an immortal born. Sire, the earth female seems to have little taste for immortality, yet she must learn to acquit herself like a goddess. There is no other way. This is all part of the marriage ritual, the godhead that Odin bestowed her, and the new power that he bestowed her is like a wedding present. I shall afford her the opportunity to make amends for what has gone before. Summon ye the unknown. And so now this is going to be Jane Foster's test, her initiation into the family, and in a way this is also, there's so many wonderful things going on in this story, and one of them is this is sort of like the meet the in-laws kind of storyline that we've seen in other kinds of fiction, where it's like, I'm going to take you home to meet my family, but it's like maybe a little embarrassing. Maybe there's, some family secret, or maybe you feel like you're different from your family, and it's, you're maybe embarrassed by some of their customs, their strange customs that maybe aren't shared by your fiance. And so one of them is this test with the unknown, where, they strike a giant tuning forks being an important motif to Kirby around this time. Black Bolt of the Inhumans with the tuning fork on his head was introduced not too long before this. This guy strikes the tuning fork and runs. The pulsating echoes fill my very soul with dread. I must flee the accursed chamber before it is too late, before the unknown appears. So this thing, the unknown, again, Kirby has learned from Galactus. You introduce some, new, intimidating, scary kind of thing, you give it a big buildup. And so this is the buildup. And it's a little bit unfair testing Jane Foster with the unknown, because even this hardened Asgardian who's been, a god his whole life is still scared of this guy. So, I mean, what do they expect? But again, if she passes the test, then I think that settles the issue. So they lock her in this room with the unknown, and he truly is unknown. We don't get a good look at him here. We just get this really scary looking shadow, this insectile humanoid creature, really gross, kind of scary texture on him. And, Thor's there as the door is being closed on her. She looks truly terrified. Face it. Face what? Thor, don't leave me. I'm afraid. I shall not be far from thee, beloved. Remember, thy newly granted powers may aid thee in what is to come. Have thee faith, my love. The prize is worth the risk. So this has it feels a little bit like Bluebeard or something. Like she's seeing a side of her fiance, her beloved, her soon-to-be husband that's kind of scary. Like he would have never done this before. What's going on now? She's getting like the view of like what this guy's really about, and it's kind of sinister. Very different than from their relationship up to this point. But he's Thor, okay? Again, great tension. He's still our hero, and as much as he'd like to sort of put her in there and have her do the test and come out with flying colors, and sort of knowing that she's an immortal, so this thing won't really be able to hurt her, but he can't just stand by and let this thing happen, hear her in such distress. And so he comes in, goes into battle with this thing quite beautifully, if you ask me. This is just a really great sequence, great monster, and does the hero bit, knocks this thing back. And Jane says, I must get out. I must leave, run away, escape this world of fear and madness. I can stand no more. If I stay, I'll go mad. This also kind of reminds me of like one of those Munsters episodes where Marilyn brings home her boyfriend to meet the family, and then the guy, goes running out the door. And omnipotent one, with all due respect, art thou not causing Jane Foster to undergo more than mortal female can endure? I say thee nay, if thou wouldst have her a goddess be, then a goddess heart she must possess. Hast thou so soon forgotten on fear doth the unknown feed? It is for that reason he hath never invaded the golden realm, for the gods of Asgard know not the meaning of fear. But hear me, father, she is no warrior, she is no Valkyrie born, she is but my beloved, gentle and kind and true. Is there no place for one such as she in the home of the gods? No, don't ask him, I don't want it. I won't be a goddess. I won't stay in Asgard. It's too horrible, too unendurable. Don't you realize how mad it is? She hath more wisdom than thee, my son. Though Asgard be heaven enow, her place is on earth below. No, father, no, I have spoken. And he banishes Jane Foster back to Earth. And Thor is anguished. Thor is, pissed. 'Tis clear to me now thou didst plan the entire thing. It was never intended that Jane Foster should become an immortal. Stand thee back, Thunderguard. None may approach the presence in anger. Let him be. My son hath the right. Most noble Thor, I understand thy rage, thy disappointment, but 'tis not as thou hast stated. My heart doth grieve for thee, but thou must endure this happenstance in godly manner. I shall endure nothing. I shall follow her. What? You dare dispute the will of Odin? Though my mercy be without peer, know you my wrath is all-consuming. So we're seeing this sort of, destructive, terrifying aspect of Odin, the god of Job, this terrifying father. What Thor is saying is something that, I kind of feel, and maybe the readers feel too, that you've been stringing us along, Jack and Stan. You kept making it look like these two were going to end up together happily ever after, but you had no intention of doing that. You played us. So Thor is sort of speaking for all of this in this moment. Thou be the son of my heart, the flesh of my flesh. Thou art bravest, most faithful, most heroic in all the cosmos. But still am I, Lord Odin. Still is my word supreme, my will unquestioned. Now rise, God of thunder. In thy heart of hearts thou knowest godhood was not for one such as she. Still do I love her, my father. Though she be frail and weak, have I not strength enow for the two? He's not going to take, any kind of bullshit on Thor's part. He's not going to let his son strike him or anything. He's going to put Thor in his place. But then, after he's sort of taken care of that, the rebellion, he's going to, be the loving father again. Now, my copy here is missing pages 13 and 14. I had two copies of this comic, this one and then a coverless copy. And a few years back, I was going through my collection and I thought, okay, why do I have two copies of this? Let me, get rid of the coverless one. I'll give the coverless one away. And so I did. But what I didn't realize was that the reason I had a coverless one and a regular one is the one with the cover was missing 2 pages, and then the coverless one was coverless, but the interior was complete. So that's why I had both of them. So I am missing these 2 pages, but my recollection of them is that Jane Foster goes back to Earth, and she's, upset about all of this, and then she meets a doctor who looks exactly like Don Blake, except he's got brown hair instead of blonde, and then slowly she sort of magically forgets all of the events of this and forgets that about Thor and sort of falls in love with this doctor, and that it was Odin's sort of reward for her and his mea culpa, his apology. He granted her the gift of forgetfulness and pointed her in the direction towards true love and a love, more to her liking. So somebody who was like a better fit for her and what she wanted out of life. Kind of like the kiss at the end, the magical kiss at the end of Superman 2, where Lois forgets all her anguish over not being able to, marry Superman. The adventure continues. So Thor has to go out and fight the unknown, because now the unknown is loose in Asgard. And he fights it, and it's, closing in on him. It has him at its mercy. And then a strong sword arm shows up. Suddenly, as the golden-haired gladiator, seemingly lacking the will to fight on, watches his foe with hypnotic fascination, another arm is raised against the unknown. Rise and fight, Thunder God. Fight, son of Odin. Fight as you have fought so gallantly in days of yore. For if you should fail now, then my life too is surely forfeit. I say thee nay, none other shall perish through fault of Thor. Then, with a blood-curdling battle cry ringing from his lips, the mightiest warrior of all time once again enters the fray, his smashing hammer driving the unknown back as daylight shatters the gloom of night. Though I have heard of your prowess since my birth, never have I beheld so magnificent a sight as Thor in battle. He hath been vanquished, but what of my new-found ally? Let me now behold the one whose blade hath been unsheathed in Thor's behalf. By the bristling beard of Odin, 'tis a female, so beauteous as to stagger even a god. Art thou truly real, or merely a vision of loveliness conjured in desperation by the agony of a breaking heart? You knew me once, many years ago, as today you know my brother, the ever-faithful Heimdall. Can it be thou art Sif? So Thor, meets up with Sif, and it's love at first sight. And he seems to forget all his troubles and his heartache over the loss of Jane Foster. And Sif looking very much like Rosalind Kirby, Jack Kirby's wife, and looking a bit like Big Barda, who would be the wife of Mr. Miracle. And Sif, in the mythology, is the wife of Thor, in the Norse mythology. So again, the series, as it goes on, hewing away from the sort of superhero conventions and towards the sort of mythological. I like Sif a lot. She's a very popular character. I knew Sif before I knew Jane Foster. I'd read a lot of Thor comics with Sif before I read any of the Jane Foster comics. So Jane Foster was a bit of a surprise when I started reading the older ones. Then, as mighty Thor and the stunning Sif turn and walk into the gathering twilight, in thine infinite wisdom, sire, thou hast this day performed a seeming miracle. Nay, not so. I did but provide the time, the setting, but only in the heart can be found the final enchanted ingredient men call love. And so say we all. So that's the end of, the Thor as we know it, up to this point, and the beginning of what Thor, becomes. Moments like this make me feel the authorial hand over the sort of, the reality of the story, and points to some of the things of some of the limitations of serialized narrative. When I watched Cheers, the TV show Cheers, as a kid, I had similar feelings when the storyline, it was the ongoing romance between Sam and Diane, and it went in all kinds of directions, and you were heavily invested in it. And then they got engaged, and then they were getting ready to be married, and then the wedding doesn't happen. They go their separate ways. It's very sad, very moving, and basically, was not because of the dynamics of the story, but because of sort of real world things that. What are they going to do? End the show? They live happily ever after. The show had been propelled by this, sort of this ongoing romance, and so happily ever after sounds like the end to me. And then even more so, the fact that Shelley Long, who played Diane, was leaving the show to pursue a career in film. It leaves like the fan, the reader, the viewer, kind of feeling a little like left in the dust by the narrative. And so the same here. So we've read all these issues where Thor is, gonna move the earth for the love of Jane Foster, and they're heading towards this happily ever after, and we see the story progress. But see you later, Jane Foster, and here's Sif. Now again, Sif is great, and if I had to guess, I would guess that it was Kirby's idea to write Jane Foster out of the series and replace her with Sif, a character that looks like Kirby's wife. Again, when the comic started, it was a superhero comic with some mythic elements, some sci-fi elements, but as the series has gone on, Kirby's vision has kind of solidified and it's heading more into this sort of cosmic mythic realm, and like having a Lois Lane type to slow things down, just it felt like it wasn't, that was a different era, and we're in a new era, and so Sif sort of marks that, and I get the feeling that Kirby never really liked the Jane Foster character that much, maybe just kind of saw her as like a plot device. It might not even have been his idea to have Jane Foster in it. It might have been Stan Lee's idea or Larry Lieber's. I mean, it could very well have been Jack's, but it also might have been an idea that he just kind of, threw in there. But working on this, sort of seeing the limitations of that character, looking at the original art with Jack Kirby's notes, his handwritten notes, I don't recall ever seeing him in his margin notes referring to her by name. He wouldn't say, Jane or Jane Foster or Nurse Foster. He would say the girl. So I feel like, to Kirby, she was kind of just sort of, a cliche, a plot device. The same way Kirby talked about getting to a point where it's like, I don't need to make superhero comics where the bad guys are gangsters anymore. I need to, get to that next level. I think it was the same thing with sort of Jane Foster, where I don't need to make a comic book where, Superman's in love with Lois Lane. I want to start making, I want to start making comics where, Thor is in love with the goddess Sif, an equal, somebody. But as much as I love Sif as a character, and as much as I love the mythology, and as much as I love, Jack Kirby's, creative instincts and things, if I were to do a Thor grand design, I would do something different with this part of the story, because I think you can move this series into that mythic direction without getting rid of Jane Foster. And in fact, I think if this issue had sort of ended with maybe Jane Foster, having her meltdown saying, "Get me the fuck out of here. I don't want to be here." And then maybe having an epilogue where Thor and her have a little conversation afterwards and, come to some kind of understanding, some kind of compromise, and have, Jane Foster say, "You know what? I love you. I'm willing to give this a shot. I'm going to give it a shot." And maybe I was a little too hasty. It was a little scary, but let's start taking baby steps. And so what would happen in the story at that point is a lot of things that I think would have improved the series and the story as a whole, and not make all those like Jane Foster years feel like they were just, wasted time, but that Jane Foster would become sort of a goddess in training, a superhero in training, which would give the series like an interesting momentum. I felt that with all the minuses in those later issues of Mr. Miracle, one of the good points was I did like the idea of having sort of like a monthly issue by issue comic where superheroes are training an apprentice to become a superhero, the way Barda and Scott Free trained Shiloh Norman to be a superhero. I think that's an interesting dynamic and not something we'd really seen. Dick Grayson goes from apprentice to full-fledged superhero in one issue. It's not like there was, a series of Batman stories where like little by little he's teaching him the ropes and he's getting better and better. So I think that would be a really interesting dynamic in Thor, where Jane Foster would go from being, this nurse he's trying to keep his secret identity from, to being, his partner, and also being, you get to see like another perspective on all this stuff. You have Thor as this established god of war, and then a human being who's learning to be a god, learning to be a superhero, learning to master these powers, and Thor training her. And so all of the adventures that are going to happen in the next couple of issues, where Thor fights with Sif by his side, I think would be a lot more interesting if instead it was sort of that goddess version of Jane Foster fighting alongside Thor, and maybe stumbling a bit here or whatever, and then overcoming some obstacle and having it feel like a real victory when she does do some sort of heroic maneuver. I think that would be a much more interesting dynamic for the story. And so if I did a Thor Grand Design, that's when I did Fantastic Four Grand Design, there were points where I veered from the established canon because, again, I'm trying to make the best comic I can make. I'm trying to make my thing, my Grand Design, interesting in its own right and a real story in its own right. And so I felt that it was necessary to shape the story according to my own creative instincts and my own, ideas. And I would do the same thing with the Thor. And so that would be my divergence. Maybe Sif would show up as a character, as sort of an extended member of like the Warriors 3, but I would keep Jane Foster as Thor's, partner in all this. And I think it would just make for a more satisfying whole. And in the coming issues, I'll sort of show, areas where it's of how that would play out in the coming issues. I feel like there are probably other people at Marvel who feel the same way I did because in the recent years, Jane Foster disappears altogether from Kirby's run. I think there's like one more appearance, like towards the end of Kirby's run on Thor, where Jane comes back for an issue and we get to check in on her, but she's not. Her role in this story as a whole is done. But in recent years, I think other creators at Marvel probably feel the same way I do reading through this. And they brought Jane Foster back into the comics in a major role and as, Thor's girlfriend. And they started making Thor movies. Natalie Portman played her. So, Sif is kind of a minor character in the Thor movies, but Natalie Portman's Jane Foster is a pretty major character in those movies. And then even the most recent Thor movie, she gets the power of Thor. So she does become a goddess again, like in this story. So I feel like I'm not the only one who thinks that Jack Kirby and Stan Lee missed a really, really big opportunity in dismissing Jane Foster the way she did. Now, again, they are coming up with this stuff on the fly. I think of it almost as, making comics at gunpoint. It's like these deadlines are relentless. They're both working on multiple books. And, again, I'm assuming Kirby's instinct, maybe it was Kirby and Stan, maybe it was just Stan, maybe it was just Kirby, but I feel that it was, Kirby's instincts were telling him that, Jane Foster, as we know her, isn't going to cut it. We're beefing up this comic. It's becoming, he's getting ready to segue into New Gods. He just kind of never pulls the trigger fully. So something told him he had to do this. He had to bring in Sif. But I think, had he had more time, again, I've had the benefit of decades looking at this stuff decades after the fact and coming to the conclusion that, back Monday morning quarterback, looking at this and saying, oh, no, you can make it work with Jane Foster and it would actually be beautiful. It would actually be even better if you did that. But one other thing, Jack Kirby as a creator was extremely honest and he wrote from the gut and he really believed in the humanity of his characters. He really, did his best, really viewed them as real people, to as much as you can do with, a fiction that you're creating. I feel like if I had presented this to Kirby and said, hey, what about this? What if you, kept Jane Foster as a goddess and she becomes like a superhero in training, a greatest American hero or something, and she gets a little bit better with each issue, gives the story this arc, this really beautiful ongoing arc. I feel like what he might say is that, that sounds fine or whatever, or maybe even, I considered that, but it just wouldn't be honest. When I sat down to make this comic, Jane Foster didn't want that. Jane Foster didn't want to be a goddess. That was not her world. She tried. She really loved Thor. She loved Thor, as much as anybody's ever loved anybody. But she just couldn't do it. She didn't want it. She didn't want to be a goddess. And if I had, pointed the story in that direction that you're talking about, it would have been dishonest. I wouldn't have been telling an honest story. I'd be lying. Like, I feel like Kirby was that kind of creator. And I'm not that kind of creator. If I come up with a really crazy idea, I'm going to try to make that idea happen. And to me, these are fictional characters. This is make-believe. This is fake. So, Jane Foster is going to do whatever I think would make the best comic. But, I think maybe there's a lesson there that Jack Kirby, maybe that's one of the keys to Jack Kirby's greatness, that like he really understood and believed in the reality of his characters in a way that I don't think very many creators do, myself included. And maybe that's something that I'm going to work on. Maybe that's a goal I can work towards in 2024. It's one of my favorite issues. It breaks my heart. It's beautiful and wonderful, and it hurts to read. So that's the part that kind of breaks my heart. That they went separate ways when I feel like they could have, found a way that their love is sort of stronger than their differences, and that they could, find a way to make it all work. But in the end, who knows? It's just a comic book. Jake. There shall come a miracle. And so now we're continuing this, really fun Tales of Asgard story with Fafnir the dragon. Yet another view screen. Thor's fighting the dragon. It's continuing on. Now at last my vengeance is at hand. Now at last the son of Odin dies. So yeah, again, that great story machine of, having villains who have some grudge against Thor's millennia-old father, who sort of, tamed the elements in the elder days of the universe. And they've got a grudge, and the way they're going to take out their grudge is by killing the son of their enemy, much like Zod and the Phantom Zone villains in the Superman movies. I'd love to have had the opportunity to interview Richard Donner and ask him about Thor, and if Thor, was an influence, or maybe talk to Tom Mankiewicz, or if I had been able to talk to Mario Puzo. And Thor does the sort of Gandalf thing, you shall not pass, and strikes the ground and, creates a fissure in the earth that swallows Fafnir. And then they find their buddy Volstagg, who was imprisoned 2 issues ago. Thor, taps this prison with his hammer. Volstagg's free. Our task is ended. Now naught but the promised miracle remains. Of what manner of miracle hast thou been foretold? I know not its nature, but the sacred word of Odin hath been so pledged. 'Tis done, my lord. Yet mine eyes do not perceive the miracle of which thou hast spoken. Thine eyes are witness to it even now. 'Tis the very sight thou dost gaze upon. Never before hath a blessed blanket of rain so caressed the barren wasteland of Nastrond. Rain which is truly the harbinger of life, the promise of the new day which is yet to be. And in time to come the soil shall turn green once more, the grass shall grow and plants shall sprout above the place where Fafnir fell. For such is the way of life, life universal, which can never vanish whilst faith endures. I dream of rain on Arrakis. Sweet little story. Basically, a hero, a knight on horseback fighting a dragon, and by banishing the dragon, transforming the land and bringing life to a dead space, bringing rain to Arrakis, bringing green grass to Arrakis. Next issue, A Grim Secret Hath Hogan. We're looking at one of the great comic books of all time. This particular issue is pretty wonderful. And a lot of great stuff ahead of us. But we might be peaking around this time. It's gonna hit a fever pitch, and then the wave will subside. Still a lot of greatness ahead, though. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. I am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee, and Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, The Adventures of Adam Starr and the Solar Legion. I'm also the author of WITCHMAN, a new superhero comic book, which recently had a successful Kickstarter campaign. I'll see you next Thursday.